6 months ago, the United States executed what you can only call a geopolitical earthquake. Seriously, they didn't just put economic pressure on a dictator's regime, they physically went in and removed him. Imagine a pre-dawn operation where forces bombed air defenses, literally extracted Nicolas Maduro from his own compound in Venezuela and flew him straight to a federal jail cell in Brooklyn. I mean, it was a decapitation strike straight out of a Hollywood thriller. But as we're going to see in this explainer, capturing the man at the top, well, that's really only the first chapter of a much darker and, frankly, a much more complicated story.
Over 3,500. That is the ticking death toll from a devastating twin earthquake that just struck Venezuela in June. And starting here, just 6 months after that massive military extraction, it really grounds us in a brutal reality. Because it turns out removing a dictator doesn't magically or instantly stabilize a collapsing nation. Instead, thousands of his former subjects were just buried under rubble. When you trace the events from the military operation straight through to this natural disaster, it reveals a pretty stark truth. Toppling a regime and stopping a collapse, those are absolutely not the same thing. In fact, pulling out the linchpin might actually accelerate the breaking point.
Part 1. The Buildup and the Capture. Operation Southern Spear.
Just look at how fast this escalated. The timeline here is incredibly rapid and aggressive. Back in August 2025, the U.S. assembled a naval force in the Caribbean. And guys, this didn't look like a standard drug interdiction mission. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like an invasion fleet. We're talking 11 warships, 15,000 troops, a whole carrier strike group, and F-35s. Fast forward to November, and Washington officially brands the regime leader a terrorist. This quickly escalated into actual strikes on alleged drug trafficking vessels, which ended up leaving over 221 people dead and sparked massive international outcry. And then, it all culminated on January 3, 2026. U.S. forces strike the air defenses, seize Maduro and his wife, and by nightfall, he is sitting in New York. The U.S. essentially declared, okay, we're running the show now.
Okay, but here's where things get really wild. The entire justification for this massive military campaign was rooted in narco-terrorism charges, specifically the claim that Maduro headed the Cartel de los Soles. However, as reporting on the revised indictment actually reveals, prosecutors appear to have quietly abandoned the claim that this cartel is a real, structured criminal organization. Let that sink in for a second. Instead, it's now viewed as a sort of legal shorthand for a broader system of official corruption. So, the terrorist designation that was used to justify a literal military invasion, it is resting on incredibly shaky legal ground.
Part 2. A Puppet and a Warlord. The Real Power in Caracas.
So officially, the face of the new government is interim President Delcy Rodriguez. She was sworn in within 48 hours of Maduro being captured. But if we're being real, true power sits somewhere else entirely. Enter Diosdado Cabello, the Interior Minister. This guy commands the secret police, military intelligence, and a massive militia network of 220,000 fighters. To put that into perspective, that is more than twice the size of the regular army. Cabello's legitimacy doesn't even come from his current title. It comes from his history as a hardcore loyalist to Hugo Chavez, going all the way back to the original 1992 coup attempt. Now, he isn't out there openly seizing power. Instead, he's quietly coordinating from the shadows, knowing full well the U.S. is watching his every move. It's a classic puppet and warlord scenario, and it's playing out right in front of us.
Part 3. The Insurgency Nobody Mentions. An Expanding Threat.
You see, taking out Maduro didn't magically erase the armed groups that thrived in his shadow. If anything, it energized them. Take the ELN, a Colombian guerrilla movement. They are now present in 7 different Venezuelan states, boasting roughly 1,700 fighters. Under the old regime, there was kind of a quiet tolerance, Protection payments exchanged for border control. But with Maduro out of the picture, that fragile arrangement has completely shattered. The ELN is actively exploiting the destabilized security state, creating a massive expanding threat that Washington, Bogotá, and Caracas are all scrambling to contain.
And as you might guess, the international backlash has been absolutely fierce. Brazil's President Lula called the U.S. operation a serious affront to sovereignty, saying it's a step toward a world where the law of the strongest prevails. And he is definitely not alone in thinking that. 6 regional governments issued a joint statement expressing profound concern. Colombia's president even initially deployed troops to the border. Right now, legal scholars are actually debating whether this whole operation constitutes a kidnapping under the UN Charter. So while the U.S. might have framed this as a targeted anti-terror operation, to a huge chunk of Latin America, it looked terrifyingly like a return to forced regime change.
Part 4. Unresolved Disputes, Oil and Borders.
Take the Essequibo dispute, for example. Venezuela has claimed this oil-rich chunk of neighboring Guyana for a long time. Bizarrely enough, under the new interim government, this crisis has actually escalated. Get this, they held a rigged regional election to install a governor over land they don't even administer. An election where absolutely zero actual residents voted. And it's not just political theater either. A Guyanese soldier was actually shot on the border, which marks the most concrete armed incident we've seen all year. Now, analysts will tell you that Venezuela's lack of military capacity puts the dispute on ice for now. But make no mistake, the temperature on that border is still boiling.
Meanwhile, the economic engine of the country is just completely stalled out. Back at its peak in 1998, Venezuela was pumping out 3.5 million barrels of oil a day. By the time of the collapse, it had crashed to a low of just 800,000. Now, post-capture in 2026, it's crept back up slightly to 1.07 million. Yes, international companies like Chevron, BP, and Shell are slowly returning, and U.S. sanctions are easing up a bit. But forecasts are deeply, deeply divided. Some analysts see production flatlining, others predict some mild growth. Ultimately, all of it hinges on the massive if of genuine political stability. And stability? Well, that is the last thing Venezuela has right now.
Part 5. The system fails. The June earthquake.
Then, tragedy struck again. Twin earthquakes, hitting just 39 seconds apart, tore through north-central Venezuela. Beyond the thousands who tragically died, nearly 50,000 people were unaccounted for at one point. Right now, 700,000 children desperately need humanitarian aid. Roughly 1,000 buildings and 400 schools have been severely damaged or completely wiped out. This wasn't just a national disaster. It was the total structural collapse of a system that had already been hollowed out by decades of corruption and neglect. And it left a brand new, completely untested government holding the bag, trying to pick up the pieces.
And the government's response? Well, while firefighters literally lacked the fuel to get to rescue sites, and survivors were left digging through the rubble with their bare hands, mostly because the state offered almost no rescue guidance or official donation points, interim President Delcy Rodriguez decided to tour the disaster zone wearing a designer jacket worth over $1,000. I mean, the visual contrast there was just brutal. Her disapproval rating skyrocketed instantly to 63%. In the end, private companies, NGOs, and even opposition figures ended up doing way more for the relief effort than the actual government did.
Part 6. A fractured opposition, locked out of the crisis. To make matters even more chaotic, the opposition is totally turning on itself. Take Maria Corina Machado. She's the prominent opposition leader the U.S. has traditionally backed. Well, she tried to fly home to assist with earthquake relief. The response? The interim government abruptly closed its airspace just to block her from landing. And then, the U.S. administration, the exact same country that installed this transition government in the first place, publicly attacked her attempt to return. They called it grotesque political opportunism and a photo op. So right now, Machado is barred from holding office until 2036, she doesn't have a passport, and she's fighting against the very interim government that Washington supports. The allies are completely tearing each other apart, all while the country continues to suffer.
So, here we are. The dictator is sitting in a federal cell in Brooklyn. The legal justification for putting him there is incredibly wobbly. Warlords are essentially running the streets, armed insurgents are expanding their territory, international neighbors are furious, and the actual people of Venezuela? They're digging themselves out of the rubble of an earthquake with their bare hands, completely abandoned by a fractured political class. It really forces us to ask, does removing the man at the top actually stabilize a collapsing nation? Or does it just shift the breaking point squarely onto the shoulders of everyone left standing in the ruins?